So we're live now, are we? Yeah. So welcome everybody to this marketplace session as part of the Sustainable Earth Institute Forum. We've got two speakers today, or two guests and topics to cover today. We've got the Green Minds project, which will be speaking first, and then we're going to a session which has been called From Urban Fly Tipping to Gardening, but actually Helen, the topic she's going to be talking around is a little bit more specific. So creating moments of, moments of inspiration. Helen, do you want to just repeat the topic of the set? Can you put yourself?
Creating small moments of awe in the urban environment.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Helen. And this is a little bit confusing in the sense that I'm chairing the session, but the way it's worked out is I've also been a part of the Green Minds project, so I'm going to be speaking briefly as part of the Green Minds. But I'm going to hand out. So one thing to let you note is that in the right-hand side in this Spot Me platform, you should see the Q&A. So please do take the opportunity to ask questions. We've got about 25 minutes per speaker group, and then we'll have some time within that 25 minutes to ask questions and answer questions. So do please write in the thing that you would be interested to know more about, or a conversation in the comment, and we can pick that up then as part of the session and involve the speakers here. So if there are any questions before we start, but otherwise I'm delighted to introduce Professor Sian Rees, who is going to be chairing the Green Minds discussion and presentation. So Sian, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thank you. So can everybody see the screen? Got it up? Okay, great. So this is welcome to our Green Minds project. We have 3 speakers lined up. We have Gemma Sharman from Plymouth City Council, Eva McGrath from the University, and Professor Catherine Wills from the University as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to share work that we're undertaking as part of our university commitment to the Green Minds project. And we'll also introduce some reflections on how we work as a university and cut across to civil and civic matters within the council. So without delay, we will get started, and Gemma is going to go. So go ahead, Gemma.
Great, thank you, Sian. Thanks, Catherine. So I've been working closely with Sian and Catherine and Eva, who are all going to speak today as well. But before they talk in a bit more detail, I thought we could set the scene on kind of the Green Minds project and its approach, and then how we're working in collaboration with the university as well as other partners. So Green Minds is an EU-funded programme. It's under their Urban Innovation Actions funding stream. We've got 7 partners, as you can see on the screen there. Oh, sorry, back a slide. And it's really about testing innovative solutions to urban challenges. So really, when we put together the Green Minds a bid and the application for that, we wanted to build on a lot of the success we've had on a very project-specific focus in Plymouth. So in terms of connecting people to nature, increasing the kind of the habitat quality, biodiversity in the city, we wanted to look at something that took more of a complex systems approach in terms of trying to achieve kind of longer-term change beyond finite projects. So moving on to the next slide. Green Minds is running until August 2023, and our aim is really about putting nature at the heart of our decision making. We want to inspire this new wave of city-wide investment in nature-based solutions in the city. You know, how do we get Plymouth to see itself as a nature city? And that is supporting kind of quality of life for people living in that city and their health and well-being, but then also looking at the nature-based solutions that it can provide to some of our urban challenges, which I'll talk a bit more about in a minute. So in terms of doing this, in terms of looking at that systems change, we really means fundamentally challenging our own existing attitudes and behaviours towards nature, how we think about it, how we engage with it, and also how we work with that. So that's ourselves as individuals, our partner organisations, but then also how we kind of build that bigger boat, how we bring other sectors into that, other stakeholders, so that they also start to kind of embed nature in their decision making and shift the value that they may or may not have on nature. And so there are kind of key aims within our overarching approach in terms of connecting other people to nature through rewilding and nature-based solution projects on the ground. So how do we make that tangible? How do we make it kind of relevant and connect people from a whole range of sectors and communities across the city? How do we kind of build habitat and better diversity? We want to experiment with different types of delivery and sustainable land management approaches that also support community stewardship and care for those spaces, and encourage things like green and nature-based enterprise in the city as well. Catherine will be talking a bit more about this later, but we're looking at how we can use science and digital tools to make nature more visible, more exciting. And again, Eva and Sian have been working with this, but again, how we evaluate our impact and also communicate what we've learned in lots of different ways. So they'll be talking more about those last two elements in a minute. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one of our approaches around looking at sustainable land management and nature-based solutions was to look at urban rewilding. So part of our approach is looking at what's happening in terms of the rewilding approach. There's a lot of work happening nationally and internationally, but it's often very much on a rural scale. So we wanted to look at what does this mean as an approach for our land management in an urban context, which is perhaps a kind of a newer approach to land management. And I think it's important to say that here we're looking more at kind of wildness aspects rather than wilderness. But really, in terms of what we mean in terms of our Green Minds approach to this, is about how we start to have less control, how we give nature more space, looking at the in-between nature, how we build nature corridors that support this sort of Lawton principles about bigger, better, more joined up, but then also help connect communities into those spaces and encourage them to have everyday nature experiences as well. It's also about how nature, we want to encourage nature for its own right, but also recognizing that our these nature-based solutions to some of our urban challenges around things like flooding, health inequalities, air quality, etc. as well. So it is a pretty ambitious approach for a programme. And if you're on to the next slide, because of this ambitious approach, we wanted to look at kind of these 5 themes in terms of delivering nature-based solution projects on the ground that give us then opportunities for participation for communities, but also, again, different sectors and stakeholders. So to try and make sure it had a kind of tangible focus and it just didn't feel too big, so that we could kind of test out and experiment on some of these different sites. I won't go into in great detail now, because I haven't got a lot of time, but with the 5 main themes are around a strategic city park, so Central Park, around sustainable urban drainage and looking at the future treescapes we'll need in terms of some of those challenges around disease and climate change, etc. How we use digital and as well as on-site engagement interpretation tools to support that connection to nature. The second one is a new space that we're currently developing at the moment. A green space area behind the Derriford Hospital as a community park and a city farm, pool farm. And that really, again, is about how we restore that landscape to have a more rewilded landscape to allow more natural regeneration. And some of you may have picked up on some of the bigger news there, which has been around the beaver reintroduction as part of that. But also how we build a centre for nature-based learning. So that's things like around practical conservation and volunteering and citizen science, but also supporting education, building green skills, looking at opportunities for health and well-being as well, and looking at that as a real hub for that work. And then on a really practical level, how do people kind of access and explore nature? So looking at new cycle paths and footpaths to support that access to those spaces as well. And they should be starting to open this summer, this autumn as well. So that's coming soon. The third element is being led by Real Ideas organisation around nature-based enterprise. So businesses that benefit people and wildlife. So kind of almost building on not just having a kind of neutral effect on the environment, but is there a space for enterprise to have a really positive impact on our natural environment, as well as supporting then that kind of community social impact in those neighbourhoods as well. And we're focusing that around Devonport and Stonehouse in the city. The fourth stream is around our urban trees and rewilding corridor. So this is really taking some of those the forthcoming kind of legislation around the local nature recovery networks, and can we have a kind of test of that in the west of the city, again about how we can link habitat corridors much better, but also again supporting that access for people as well. So that will include things like kind of converting the kind of grey areas to green, could be like living walls, bridges, as well as more obvious things like tree planting and having more wildflower meadows instead of amenity grassland as well. And then finally, Saltram Countryside Park, rewilding this kind of more heritage countryside landscape is being led by the National Trust as well. So yeah, next slide, please. So with our overarching Green Minds approach, it was really how we can start to celebrate Plymouth as a nature city. You know, I really like this idea that Plymouth's a habitat and that we're all habitat managers. So we all have a part to play in that, whether it's just experiencing nature or whether it's a more active role in caring for it and supporting nature in the city as well. One of the things we really recognise is there's already quite a lot happening in Plymouth on this. So we want to kind of look at what's working well, how can we build on it, and how can we kind of support people. So I think in terms of some of our approaches, you know, we really want to look at building those connections, you know, with nature and other groups, how and support them to do more. We want to make it really easy to access it, to make it to participate. So particularly looking at ourselves as a landowner and the local authority, you know, we have a kind of duty of care, responsibility, but how do we start to open that up and lessen our control a bit to also allow others to take on more ownership and care and have more involvement in decision making on what happens in some of these spaces in our city. And we want to be open to these new ways of working, you know, so we want to try and take some playful approaches as well. And some of the examples of things that we're already doing are around our nature-based leadership program. So again, working across the city with lots of different sectors. That's coming in the autumn. We've got a new landscape technician apprenticeship scheme and apprentices in post. So again, looking at different, more nature-based approaches to land management, right, embedding those skills from the beginning. We're working with Rio on the immersive dome experiences to have a series of kind of nature experiences that are being led by groups and developed within the city. We've got a social prescribing project up at Central Park that's already got going. This afternoon, I'm talking a bit with Low Carbon Devon about our creative commission we've got coming out again. So looking at kind of more artistic creative responses to support nature connection. And then we have, if you're on to the next slide, a rewilding network and a Take Action for Wildlife programme that's already starting to emerge. And we've been doing some work around that network about, again, how does that take on more ownership, start to create a movement for urban rewilding in the city as well. So I'm really aware of time. If you want the last slide, I just wanted to touch on the kind of Green Minds impact. So obviously we're an innovation project. The idea is that we do test things out quite quickly, learn from it, feed it back into our projects. It's a very dynamic approach. But obviously we do have things we need to evidence in terms of whether it's kind of nature-based skills, well-being, attitudes to nature, quality of spaces, looking at kind of ecological increases, you know, how we're doing in terms of developing that nature-based leadership and our co-stewardship models. And this is really particularly the first element around kind of connection to nature, attitudes to nature, and our value of nature. We're working with the University of Plymouth on that impact. And I know Sian's going to talk a bit more about it, but so it's not just the research itself, but this type of applied research and the challenge of doing that in a project kind of timescale, which are often very quick, but add to that a sort of action research project where you are expected to kind of adapt and change pretty quickly is on again, even shorter timescales is obviously really challenging. But I think out of that we could have some really interesting learning and different experiences that we could be sharing more widely than Plymouth. So I think on that point, without trying to say too much more about that, is probably the point to hand over to Eva. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Gemma. And it is, you know, it's a really great project for the university, and we're super excited to be working with Plymouth City Council. And we're going to save questions to the end, but we do have 34 people in the room, so please feel free to try and keep this session a bit interactive, because it does feel like we're speaking to an open space at the moment. So please just add any questions you want, and we'll try and get back to you as we go. But next, Eva is a social scientist at the University of Plymouth, and she will now talk to to the room about how we are integrating research into this programme. So go ahead, Eva. Can you see the screen?
Yes. Hello, everybody. I have about 5 minutes and I'll be sharing 5 slides capturing a mixed method approach to understand the social value of parks through social media using a policy analysis approach. Gemma was talking about like nature-based solutions. What does that look like? And then at the end, I'll just reflect on working alongside a multi-partnership research project. Okay, next slide, please, Sean. Brilliant. So over the last few years, there's been a lot of literature and a development of understanding on the health and well-being benefits of green and blue space. There's a longitudinal study such as the People and Nature Survey for England, national and international projects such as Beyond Green Space, which is trying to understand like what do parks mean to people and how do we kind of build with parks in mind for the kind of the social economic value of people and places. So within a local context, I joined Green Minds last April, which was in the middle of COVID and lockdown. And within that context, I developed a methodology to use social media to understand the social and cultural values of green and blue spaces in Plymouth. Mel and Witten talk in a paper published a couple of months ago, say that green infrastructure is actually one of the few resources that has increased in societal value during the pandemic due to its function in providing kind of physical and social spaces for people. So I aim to look at how that was being played out in a Plymouth context. And I developed a technique of virtual participant observation, looking at Instagram posts of publicly tagged locations and reviewing the posts and the discourses. And within a time frame of 6 months between November 2019 and July 2020, I gathered 800 photos in Central Park, 300 in Saltram, 40 in Poole Farm, and close to 3,000 in Plymouth Hoe. And what this showed, next slide, please, developed a framework to really think about, well, what is the social value here? How do we begin to discern thinking about the quality of the environment, what kind of spaces people spend time within, recognizing the differences in landscape types, but also what is evidence of some of the existing biodiversity nature connections in terms of flowers or trees, awareness of environmental quality, also thinking about kind of key activity users that we can begin to think about targeting within the Green Minds approach in a citywide context, and what is the evidence of attitudes to nature. Next slide, please. Just going to whiz this through in a very short amount of time, but working alongside a mapper colleague, Tom Mullier, and based on my understanding of where photographs were taken at the time of capture, began to kind of map this out in order to understand kind of key central points within the park. So it's Saltram, bottom left, a kind of a focus point by the river, people reporting the benefits of spending time by the water for relaxation. Thinking about Plymouth Hoe, about 70% of the photographs incorporated the sea and the coast. And there was a range of activities that were represented alongside explicit links to mental and physical health, which we can kind of build upon within the programme. Second piece of analysis that I wanted to share with you, next slide, please. Was a discourse analysis of policy documents. So locally within you have the Plymouth Plan and also the Plymouth South West Joint Local Plan, and they discuss a whole range of different issues relating to green and blue space, but also in terms of education and transport, well-being, etc. So I analysed these documents in terms of thinking about, okay, well, how are they talking about the climate? How are they talking about well-being? How are they talking about health? Is it actually connected to nature? In order to kind of think about the occurrences and the context across these main policy documents, but also kind of discern the gaps and the opportunities which may be possible to influence as policy documents are being kind of renewed in a few times. And recognizing that blue space was predominantly defined as an asset for investment, and its value was defined through economic documents, but actually assessment of the social and cultural value linking to heritage, linking to well-being was much less discussed. And although green spaces were often seen as a solution to promoting active pathways, such as through sports facilities or physical activeness, such as walking or cycling, there was much less discussion about the habitats and trying to integrate an understanding of different species into kind of an urban context of Plymouth. So these are gaps that we're trying to think about planning forward through within Green Minds. And just to end in the last couple of minutes, just want to do a reflection really on researching within a multidisciplinary project. The partnership reflects a diverse area of expertise, and often people come through different epistemological viewpoints. So the caption at the bottom right is thinking about, the word sky. It means different things to different people. So within the context of something like urban rewilding or even green minds, like what does that mean? How do we begin to define these and set these parameters? So we've really had a space within the partnership to have workshops and meetings, but it has been framed through the Zoom context. Secondly, a kind of talking to people in an informal way is often at odds with a kind of qualitative research techniques which require an ethical research process, kind of an information of navigating all of that is a complexity, but it's something that we're trying to work through, and there are ultimately big benefits to working in such an action-packed research program. So I'm just going to pass now on to Sian, and Catherine will have 5 minutes or so just before we end to share her side of the Green Minds program. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eva. And I think we'll just quickly move on to Catherine, and just a reminder to keep your questions coming, and we will try and answer them as we go along at the end.
Thanks, Sian. So this is a little bit confusing. If I'm here as the chair of the session, but I'm also speaking in the session, and we have slightly run over time, so I'm going to keep this very short. I'll just do a very brief summary, and then we can move to some questions, because I can see some. I've flipped back to my other role as the chair of the main session. I can see some exciting questions coming in. It'd be great to have a chance to answer those. So I think I'll just very briefly introduce our aspect of the project. Gemma mentioned it. Obviously, there's two teams from the University of Plymouth working. We're in the School of Art, Design and Architecture, and we're looking at the sort of role of technology to deliver to other types of engaging with people and revealing hidden nature within the green and blue space in the city. And one of the ways we're looking to do that is to work within sites across the city and taking this living lab approach. So really creating a sort of space for people to experiment and engage with the green space. So if we can flip now through the next slide. And the next slide. So I'll just talk through this. We've got different types of activities. We're focusing on co-creation. So although we're talking about technology, it's all very much around engaging people, and particularly groups who may not have engaged previously with the Green Minds projects, and looking to engage those who may not have previously been involved, and creating sort of citywide experiments. At the moment, our focus has been on the Central Park, as Gemma mentioned, and we've got a living lab set up there. So we move to the next slide. We have this living lab. You can read about it on the Green Mind website. So I know some of you may be interested to find out about that. I'll put the link in the chat after we've finished. So quite happy for people to come and find out more. We've put some sensors up in the park, and we're also doing some experiments around revealing some of the species within the park and how you can. We're doing some experiments, for example, with chatting to a butterfly and engaging with that. And if you'd like to go to the park, you should be able to find some initial pilot studies up near the cafe space. Next slide. So we've been doing some of these co-creation workshops. So very much keen on this, what Gemma mentioned about the action research. Next slide. So that involves practical things like we've been attaching sensors to the trees within the central park. So actually, it's a very, although we're dealing with sort of augmented reality and live sensors, actually this is all about engaging with the natural environment and making that possible and doing it in the place. We want to bring people not on the screen, but bring people into the parks and into the green and blue space to understand more about the life and how that relates to their own experience of the green and blue space. So I think on that note, I will just draw my presentation to a close. I did have a few more slides, but I know we're running over time. And so, Sian, I think, would you like to review some of the questions, or would you like me to moderate some of the questions for you?
You go for it, Catherine, if that's what you'd like. Go for it. Okay.
Well, I know there was an interesting one. I thought maybe this would be a good one for Gemma. Have you had any kickback from residents from the wildflower meadows and letting grasses grow, which I know is one of the sort of Green Minds rewilding, no mow May type approaches? So.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So apologies. I don't seem to be able to reply to your questions and answers on the stream, so I'm trying to pick some of them up and cut and paste by a colleague. There was one of them, and we've had No Mow May running for the last couple of years, and we've definitely seen a shift, and we do get kickback. I mean, I think one of the challenges is kind of starting to embrace a slightly more kind of natural look to a city. But we do try and work hard on these, what we call like cues to care. So like, mowing an edge against the wildflower meadows, so that people feel like it's been looked after and not just left. I think that the challenge is, whilst we're kind of people's perceptions are shifting about accepting this, is not feeling like, oh, we just, because of cutbacks, we stopped doing something, or it's not being looked after and cared for. So I think, we do try and work on that as well. And actually, we've had a big shift in the last year that we've had more kind of compliments about it than complaints, so it does ebb and flow. But I think, probably this last year and the situation around COVID as well has helped. But we are definitely starting to see more positive feedback as well, and particularly on social media. So that's a big shift, but it's an ongoing challenge. And I think it's because depending on the kind of weather you get, some years things will look amazing, and some years they don't look quite as good. So and how we start to allow some natural regeneration as well as the kind of planting for the really lovely visual stuff as well, is perhaps the next step too. So arranged up, it's a constant challenge, I think, the perception of it.
Okay, thanks, Gemma. And another question that's come up is from Robert Alexander. He said that it's important to promote the science to build behavioural change, but the sustainability of the project requires a business plan. And do you have a business case on how these projects would survive?
Yeah, again, it's another constant challenge. We're partly stuck in kind of project type funding situations. So partly, I think some of that lies with funders and how things are structurally funded. For example, the team I sit in within our natural infrastructure environment planning service, most of us in my team, we're not core funded through the local authority. So obviously we've had austerity and there's a lot of cutbacks, and although a lot of us have never been funded through the council. So it's about how we can kind of embed some of these approaches in statutory services as well. So it's getting away from what we would like to shift towards, and it is a longer term aim, is that this requires less and less external project funding. But we're also looking at other models of funding, kind of this sort of blended finance. So around environment finance, this is not part of Green Minds, but it's part of Future Parks work that we're doing nationally with the National Trust and Heritage Lottery, about how, again, we move beyond either having core budgets, project funding. How do we look at things like habitat banking, environment finance, and looking at how we can resource things in that way. So we're kind of recognizing we're trying to sort of innovate and enterprise fast, I think, recognizing that those kind of traditional models of funding are not going to sustain things in the future.
Fantastic, Gemma. I think that's really interesting to hear about. I know there's quite a few questions in the chat, and we haven't had time to cover them all. So we have put the contact details for the project. So do get in touch with the team if you've got any further questions. And I think we can try and follow those up later on with people if they'd like to contact the team directly. So
Fantastic.
thank you, Sian, for brilliantly chairing that, and to Eva and Gemma for introducing the projects and the work you're doing. And we'll now move on to Helen, who will be talking about these creating these moments. And Helen is from the Inner City Seed Store. So yes, Helen, happy to pass over to you. We've got just around 20 minutes or so. So I think you're going to talk for about 10, and then we've got 10 minutes of questions. So again, I'll bring you back into the main screen, and we can have some time for questions after you've spoken. So I'll pass over to you, Helen. Thank you.
Okay. Brill. Okay, so hopefully you can see this and you can hear me. So I'm Helen from Inner City Seeds. This is my presentation called Creating Small Moments of Awe in the Urban Environment. And I wanted to start off this presentation with a picture I took of quite a common plant found in a back garden in Mutley in Plymouth called Lady's Mantle, which I'll come back to later. My name's Helen Moore, that's me on the left. I'm a community gardener in Plymouth, and I work as a gardener as well. And these are the 3 community gardening groups I run here in Plymouth: St Matthias Community Garden Project, Adelaide Street Angels Gardening Group, and most recently Inner City Seeds. Today I'm going to talk briefly about the benefits I've experienced firsthand of working with nature, and how I think even the smallest interaction can be a really important therapeutic tool when incorporated into the treatment of mental health conditions, but also as a way to maintain the mental wellness of the wider population. And I'll be talking a little bit about the plant fingerprint idea to create small moments of awe in the existing urban areas we live in. This is the St Matthias garden before we did much work on it. It was never my plan to be a gardener or a community gardener. It's definitely something I stumbled across. And my background's actually in the arts. So when I moved to Plymouth 4 years ago, I worked in a cafe. I had no friends here and no family, and my main aim was survival. Unfortunately, I lost my job at the cafe due to my mental health problems. And I noticed the church garden opposite me was being used for fly tipping, so I volunteered to give my time to keep myself busy. And I found myself spending most of my time in the garden. And then shortly the church advertised it as a gardening group, which is how the St Matthias Gardening Project came about in Mutley. And here are some photos of it afterwards, how it's changed, and the volunteers and the different little bits and bobs we've been up to. As I mentioned briefly, I have mental health problems, so anxiety, depression, and pure OCD, which are very common. And I was never looking for a cure for my mental health when I started volunteering. But for me, gardening has definitely become a journey into my own healing. And I've suffered with mental health problems for many years, and only found small effective help through the traditional methods of treatment, such as medication and counselling. And this discovery on how it helped my own mental health problems has given me the enthusiasm to offer spaces to people to garden and interact with nature, and a passion to share this experience with other people who have mental health problems. And it's really become a passion and a necessity for my own well-being. So there's been many studies and research into the positive effects of spending time in nature, and the positive effect it has on our mental well-being. Being outdoors has been proven to help with the immune system, rumination, anxiety. It decreases your heart rate, blood pressure, and changes adrenaline and cortisol levels. And just the positive effects of viewing nature, whether in person or online, has been extensively studied now. And it has been suggested that one part of this is something called fractals, which you may know about, which is the repeated patterns that can be found in nature. This is one of my favourite ones, which is a Romanesco broccoli, which I think is very beautiful. And even playing in soil for 5 minutes has been proven to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's very important because that slows our heart and breathing rates. It lowers our blood pressure and promotes digestion. And it puts our body into a state of relaxation. Other things that activate this nervous system are things like meditation, exercise, and sleep. And being in nature, it encapsulates many of our senses and brings on this state quite easily. So the chemical, they found the name of the chemical, which you smell after it rains, and there's this beautiful smell that comes about, and people often think it's from the grass, but it's actually from this chemical called geosmin. And it's really interesting because we're not very well known for our sense of smell as humans, but it is reported that we can smell it at levels as low as 100 parts per trillion, which is quite impressive, I think. So on the awe side of things, people have also looked at awe, that feeling people get when they look at an overpowering space that is beautiful, which has been linked with positive emotions, especially the awe we feel when touched by beauty of nature, art and spirituality, with lower levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines, which are proteins that signal the immune system to work harder. So just a little study I wanted to bring in, linking increased urbanization with increased mental health problems, from the PNAS research paper I came across. They did a test which I wanted to show you later on, but basically it was looking at the connection of increased urbanized areas and also urban areas that also already exist, and the impact nature can have on improving our mental health, but also the impact it has on creating things like rumination, which is highly linked to mental health problems. And it says 50% of people now live in urban areas, and by 2050, this proportion will be 70%. So it's quite an important thing to know about. So OCD, anxiety, depression are all linked with rumination, and rumination has been proven to also lead on to mental health problems. I was also going to mention the Plymouth report quickly, which you can find online, which is from the Plymouth City Council about Plymouth as an area. It's one of the most significant parts of the southwest in terms of the size of it, and how built it up in an urban respect. It currently has a population of 263,000 approximately, and this is estimated to grow to 274,000 by 2034. And Plymouth and the southwest seek to deliver 26,700 new homes. So there's an increase in population, increase in urbanisation. And that's where I was living. So there's some kind of worrying facts also on there about mental health in Plymouth, which is really important to think about in if urban areas are affecting it so greatly. And there are 26,000 people approximately in Plymouth to have the most common mental health problems: depression, anxiety, and obsessive compulsive disorder. There's a big alcohol and drug issue in Plymouth. The rates of depression have gone up from 9.0% to 12.8%. And the gap between inequalities is quite clear when you look at the deprived to the non-deprived. The deprived is 4 years and 9 months more lower than the least deprived groups in the neighbourhood. But not to worry. So the experiment offers a lot of hope. So what they did was they took participants on a 90-minute walk through the natural environment, and they reported low levels of rumination and showed reduced neural activity in the area of the brain linked to mental illness compared to those who walked through an urban environment. And what was interesting is they actually did this experiment on mentally healthy patients. So not patients, people from the community. So it was looking at ways in which we're all open to mental health problems as well. So how can we take this and put it into our tiny little urban residential environments that we live in Plymouth? From the Sage Journal, they did a test in 145 urban public housing residents randomly assigned buildings with and without nearby nature. Attentional functioning and effectiveness in managing major life issues were compared. Residents living in buildings without nearby trees and grass reported more procrastination in facing their major issues and assessed their issues as more severe. So this can be done on a smaller scale as well. So this is Wantage Gardens. Oh, right, okay. My time has gone off. I'll be quick. This is Wantage Gardens that I've been working on with Inner City Seeds. And we're looking at these existing spaces that aren't really tended to. And this is the work that we did afterwards. Planters, lots of new plants, diversity. And we even got a blue tick this year in our first bird box that we put up. And this was part of our daffodil history trail, which was connecting people to the existing history whilst looking at lots of nice daffodils. We planted lots of daffodils around the centre of a roundabout that's not really looked after in the area of Stonehouse. This is the Adelaide Street Angels Doctors Patch, which was used for fly tipping. And this is how it looks now, which is it's looking really lovely. I mean, it's called the Doctor's Patch because it's opposite the doctor's surgery. And they always tell us how much they like it there. But what's equally as important as these spaces, like being green and nice to look at and all of that sort of thing, is that they are cared after by the community, and people are seeing their community outdoors working together and looking after their environment. And this is a close-up of the Doctor's Patch. So this is the Daffodil History Trail, of which you can get a map online for free if you want to follow it. And we've been running some history walks with local historian Richard Fisher, who knows a lot about the area. And here are some pictures of him and the daffodils during the walk. I think of the most obvious example we can talk about most recently is COVID, in terms of people turning to nature for mental health release, help with staying sane. And I found this from the Office of National Statistics, which I thought was quite interesting. So charities such as the RSPB and the Wildlife Trust saw spikes in web traffic in the first national lockdown. Visits to the RSPB website increased by 69% year on year in March to May 2020, with 79% of those users being new to the website. In the same period, the RSPB recorded a 10-fold increase in views of its Build a Bird Box webpage. So I'll just very briefly tell you about my latest idea of trying to connect people with the environment and try and inspire these kind of small moments of awe. And that's by talking to people about the fingerprint of plants. So my thoughts are that plants and the natural world all around us are very much like humans in a way, because they all have a fingerprint, they all have a history, a family, friends, and they have backgrounds in medicinal uses, religious ceremonies, folklore, to name a few things. And they're also connected to other things like remembrance, loss, and care. And I believe that sharing this information with people really inspires a deeper interest in nature. And we're hopefully going to be doing a few fingerprint of plant walks around the area, like telling the story of the plants there. And this is Nicola, who is a volunteer, talking about the yew trees connection with pagan burial grounds. So there's a burial ground in North Stonehouse, and we noticed there was a yew tree there, and she knew a lot about the background. And her quote, I asked some people for quotes, and she said, "I really started to appreciate how we are part of nature, not above it. This was particularly enhanced when I learnt about the mythology attributed to trees. Learning about what trees are what helped me to cope with the uncertainties linked to the pandemic." So just briefly, so the first image I showed you earlier, I just told you the name of the plant, and it looks very visually pleasing. There's lots of fractals there. But just to give you its fingerprint. So this plant is called Alchemilla mollis, or more commonly known as lady's mantle. The Latin name Alchemilla is a reference to the use of the plant by alchemists who considered the droplets that form on the leaves the purest form of water you can find, and referred to them as celestial water. There are many reasons written down for how alchemists use the water, as a life elixir and in a quest to turn the base metal into gold. Mollis simply means soft in Latin. This refers to the soft leaves of the plant. The hairs which create this soft texture, along with the cup-like shape of the leaves, are the reasons why the droplets are captured in this way. The common name, lady's mantle, is likely from the ancient legend of it being used to adorn the Virgin Mary. It was used in the past to make tea, and has a history of having magical properties. Functionally, this plant has been used medicinally since antiquity for stomach ailments, and was also used to dye wool green. The image at the beginning was of the plant before you knew its fingerprint, and now hopefully that has inspired you to look into this plant further and look for it in your own backyard. So.
Thank you, Helen. That was we have gone slightly over time, but I didn't want to interrupt you because that was so fascinating. So thank you, and thank you for sharing, about your own experience in the project too. We've just got a couple of minutes left, so we're quite short on time. I mean, there's some really positive, supportive comments in the comments here for you, saying excellent presentation. But there was one that was just a question. Did the fly tipping stop after you fixed up the area at the doctors? And if you could just briefly touch on that.
Yeah, it stopped across all of the areas. It stopped the fly tipping because people can see the areas cared after, I think. They can see people are there. It's a bit more risky probably as well, they feel. So, yeah, it's had a really positive effect long term.
Fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I can think for the Green Minds project, it's been quite interesting that we possibly didn't know about the work that you're doing, and it's a really fascinating complement to sort of thinking about, particularly around the well-being aspects of green space and how that actually, particularly with Plymouth, the context we're in Plymouth is really important to consider. Yeah. So, just want to look through There's also some people mentioning other projects that they've thought about that are relevant. So Robert Alexander has mentioned some work he's been doing in waste prevention and helping people with furniture and white goods. So there's also the project locality, which Robert's mentioned. So it seems like there's lots of people who are in the session who really would be great to try and link up with you afterwards. So I think we've put the contact details for the Green Minds project. But just to pick up, I think lots of people have been very inspired by your talk, Helen. Inspiring, and thank you for your story. So less questions and more comments about. So if I can see your contact details you shared here. I'll just put that in the main comments. So I think there's the opportunity really for anybody who's been attending the session and would like to contact anybody who's spoken or to find out more about the projects. There should be those contact details now in the chat function. So I just encourage you to follow up after the session. I'm sure be more than pleased anyone to speak about some of the questions that have come up.
Follow Inner City Seeds on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or email us at innercityseeds@gmail.com if you want. If you have an urban site you want help with or anything like that.
Fantastic. So I think we're drawing the session to a close now. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time and for contributing. It's been great to hear about the projects in Plymouth and know all these exciting things that are happening in the city, and also how COVID sort of provided also an interesting context to think about our green and blue space differently. So I shall draw to a close. And like I said, if anyone would like to follow up afterwards, we can please do use the contact details that have gone in the chat to make contact. Thank you for attending, and yes, look forward to finding out more about the links we can make from the projects following the session.